Hello, hi, bonjour. I'm Tim Curry. You may know me as Dr. Frankenfurter from the Rocky Horror Picture Show, or as the deranged, psychotic clown from outer space. Well, if you do know me from those two, I can only imagine what you must think of me at dinner parties. The truth is, I've spent most of my life being the person other people were slightly afraid of. Villains mostly, madmen, the occasional deranged butler, one very enthusiastic pirate, and a clown that apparently traumatized an entire generation of children, which I consider one of my finer achievements. But here's the thing about playing monsters for a living. You spend so much time inside characters who feel nothing that you become extraordinarily grateful for all the moments in your real life when you feel everything. The friendships, the laughter, the people who saw through every costume and every character and simply knew the man underneath. Not long ago, someone asked me a question I hadn't really considered before. They said, "Tim, after everything, the stages, the films, the characters, the years, who are the 5 people you've loved the most?" I smiled, because that's a much more interesting question than asking which role was my favorite. Roles are something you inhabit for a while and then leave behind. People stay with you, even the ones who are gone, especially the ones who are gone. I've been lucky, extraordinarily, almost unreasonably lucky. I've worked with remarkable people across 5 decades. Some were exactly what you'd imagine. Some were completely different once the cameras stopped rolling. Some made me laugh harder than I thought possible, while standing in a costume that had no business being worn in public. The older I've become, the less I think about the performances. I think about the people, the ones who were there before the fame arrived, the ones who stayed when things became complicated. The ones who sat with me in the quiet years after my stroke in 2012, when the world I'd known suddenly looked very different from a wheelchair. Those are the people who matter, not the reviews, not the awards, not the standing ovations that felt wonderful for an evening and then disappeared like smoke. The people. When I thought about that question, 5 names came to me almost immediately, not because they were the most celebrated people I've ever known, because they made my life worth celebrating. These are those 5 people. The first name that came to mind was Richard O'Brien. Now, if there is one person on this earth without whom Tim Curry, as the world knows him, would simply not exist, it is Richard O'Brien. He wrote The Rocky Horror Show. He wrote Dr. Frank N. Furter. He handed me the keys to a character that would follow me, define me, haunt me, and delight me for the rest of my natural life. I owe him more than I know how to say, without it becoming embarrassing for both of us. But here's what people don't always understand about Richard. When he wrote Rocky Horror, he wasn't writing a franchise. He wasn't writing a cultural phenomenon. He was writing something strange and funny and personal that he wasn't entirely sure anyone else would understand. That took courage, real courage, the kind that doesn't announce itself. I remember the early rehearsals. We were a group of people who had very little except the absolute conviction that what we were making was unlike anything else. We were right about that, as it turned out. We just didn't know how right. Richard and I understood each other in that particular way that happens between people who share a sense of humor that not everyone else finds funny. We liked the same kind of absurdity. We appreciated the same kind of strangeness. We both believed that the things society found most uncomfortable were usually the most interesting things to put on a stage. Over the years, our paths crossed again and again. And every time, it felt less like running into a colleague and more like coming home to someone who remembered exactly where the whole story began. There are people who give you a role,
And then there are people who give you a life. Richard O'Brien did both. I've never stopped being grateful for it.
The next person I want to talk about is Susan Sarandon. Now, Janet Weiss and Dr. Frank N. Furter were not exactly what you'd call a conventional pairing, but Susan and I got along from the very first day on set in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with the film and everything to do with the people we happened to be. She was warm, genuinely, completely, unstoppably warm. On a film set that was as chaotic and strange as Rocky Horror, that warmth was something you held on to. People often imagine film sets as glamorous places. Rocky Horror was not a glamorous place. It was cold. It was peculiar. It involved costumes that defied both description and comfort, and in the middle of all of that, Susan Sarandon would arrive and somehow make the whole thing feel like a rather wonderful adventure. What I always admired about Susan was how completely herself she was. She never performed off stage. She never seemed interested in being anything other than exactly who she was. In a business where so many people spend enormous energy constructing a version of themselves for public consumption, Susan simply existed, authentically, unapologetically, entirely herself. I learned something from watching that. I learned that the most interesting thing you can be in any room is genuinely yourself. Not a character, not a performance, just you. We stayed in touch over the years the way old friends do in this business. Sporadically, warmly, picking up exactly where we'd left off no matter how much time had passed. She is one of those people who makes you feel, every time you see her, that the world is slightly more interesting than it was before she walked in. That's not a small thing. That's everything. Now, some people might be surprised to find Stephen King on this list. After all, he's the man who gave me Pennywise, the man who handed me a red balloon, a set of razor-sharp teeth, and the responsibility of terrifying an entire generation of people who had previously felt perfectly safe around clowns. You'd think I might hold a slight grudge. I don't. Here's the thing about Stephen King that people who only know his books don't always understand. He is one of the funniest people I've ever met. Genuinely, surprisingly, wonderfully funny. He has a laugh that fills an entire room, and a way of finding the absurdity in everything that I recognized immediately as a kindred spirit. When I was cast as Pennywise, I was aware of the responsibility. Stephen's readers had a very specific idea of what that character should be. They'd built it in their imaginations from his words. I had to find a way to honor that while still making it my own. Stephen never made me feel the weight of that pressure in a way that was crushing. He made me feel it in a way that was energizing. He trusted me. And when someone of Stephen King's stature trusts you with something that matters to him, you don't take that lightly. We talked about character, about fear, about what makes something genuinely unsettling versus what simply makes people jump. Those were some of the most interesting conversations I've ever had about craft. He also told me once, in that very direct way he has, that he thought what I'd done with Pennywise was exactly right. Coming from Stephen King, that meant more than almost any review I've ever received. I still think about those conversations. I think about them every time someone stops me on the street and tells me I ruined clowns for them permanently. Which, I want to be clear, I consider a tremendous compliment. The next person I want to talk about is someone who shaped me before I had any idea I was being shaped. Beryl Reid. If you know the name, you already understand why she's on this list. If you don't, I urge you to remedy that immediately. Beryl was one of the most extraordinary actresses Britain has ever produced.
She was also one of the most extraordinary human beings I have ever been fortunate enough to know. When I was still finding my way, still figuring out what kind of actor I wanted to be, still slightly terrified by the whole enterprise, Beryl was already everything I hoped to become. She had a freedom on stage that I had never seen before and haven't quite seen since. She played every character from the inside out. She found the humanity in everything, even the most grotesque, even the most broken, especially the most broken. I watched her work and understood something essential.
The best acting is not about transformation, it's about recognition.
Finding the part of yourself that understands this person and letting that understanding do the work. Off stage, she was magnificent in an entirely different way. She was funny.
Wickedly, precisely, perfectly funny.
She had opinions about everything and she shared them freely, and somehow you always came away feeling better for having heard them. She was kind to me at a time when kindness mattered enormously. When you're young and uncertain and the whole world seems to be waiting for you to fail, one person who treats you like you already belong changes everything. Beryl treated me like I belonged. I've been trying to live up to that ever since. The last person I want to talk about is someone most of the world has never heard of, Marcia Hurwitz, my manager, my friend, the person who was there through every chapter of the last 30 years and never once made me feel like a client.
People in this business talk about loyalty endlessly.
They use the word the way other people use salt, freely and without much thought. Marcia is what loyalty actually looks like. When I had my stroke in 2012, everything changed.
The world I had known, the world of stages and sets and all that beautiful, exhausting, magnificent chaos, suddenly became very difficult to navigate. Marcia never left. She didn't step back. She didn't become professional and distant in the way that people sometimes do when things become complicated. She stepped forward. She advocated for me. She protected me. She made sure that the world understood that a wheelchair does not diminish a person, that the voice was still there, that the mind was still there. That Tim Curry was still there, still interested, still engaged, still very much himself. Beyond the business, she simply showed up, to talk, to laugh, to sit quietly sometimes, when sitting quietly was what was needed. I've spent most of my career playing people who inspire fear. Having someone who inspires only trust is something I've never taken for granted. When people ask me how I got through the difficult years, the honest answer is simpler than they expect. I had good people. Marcia Hurwitz was the best of them. I've spent 80 years on this earth, most of them in costume of one kind or another, most of them playing people I would not want to invite to my home for any extended period of time. And yet, looking back now, what I feel most is not the strangeness of the journey. It's the extraordinary good fortune of the company. Richard gave me the character that opened every door. Susan showed me what it looks like to be completely yourself in a world that constantly asks you to be something else. Stephen trusted me with something that mattered to him, and I have never forgotten the weight of that trust. Beryl showed me, before I had the words for it, what great acting actually is, and Marcia held the whole thing together when it most needed holding. People remember the characters. Pennywise, Furter, the butler, the villain, the voice from animated films that made children simultaneously delighted and unsettled. I remember the people. They were always more interesting than anything I invented. They were always more real than any monster I ever played. And long after the costumes are put away and the lights go down for the last time, they are what remains.
That's not nothing. That's everything. Hello, goodbye, au revoir.